Kilmeade. Time for one more thing. Let's go here. Greg's sibling rivalry news. You know, anybody who has cats know they love, when they're siblings, they love to play pretend. Let's take a look at Steve and Jeff Franklin here playing their own version of Fox and Friends. The front in front is Steve Ducey, and you see Kilmeade in the back. Oh, see? A typical episode of Fox and Friends.
Ow.
There it is. Here we go.
It's quite a whack.
Watch it again.
Ow.
I know. Terrible. That's a...
Where did you find that?
I didn't find that. It was foisted upon me, much like Kilmeade being foisted upon us.
Yeah. On a serious note, oftentimes when I'm at home and not on the 5, I don't have a chance to watch the 5, and I hear things that happen when I'm not around, and I deny it. I say that's not something that I could ever foresee happening, and then I came upon this.
When I heard Kilmeade's voice, I'm going, oh, God, why does he have to ruin everything? Fox with Friends, and that's when Ducey and Kilmeade move in with Chandler and Joey. The dream that I have most often is I'm in a lifeboat with Dobbs and Kilmeade. Oh. And me and Dobbs are waiting for Kilmeade to fall asleep so we can butcher and eat him. I have real celebrity friends.
Kilmeade.
Well, he's not a celebrity.
Oh, ouch. I'm going to wrap that
I love his new hairpiece, though. For the longest time, they thought it was Brian Kilmeade. That's why Brian Kilmeade would get in trouble all the time, because it was me.
I said there's no way that Greg would turn on me like that every single night over the course of years. And I saw the video evidence sitting on my desk. And thank you, Kimberly, for defending me almost every time.
Thank you.
We are not speaking anymore.
All right,
I think it means he loves you.
By the way, the hairpiece looks great.
Thank you very much.
It was like the year.
I just came in.
It was like the year filling in on Fox and Friends, helping you out.
Absolutely.
You could be towed underwater.
Yes.
He grows on you.
Dana?
All right, today is the 102nd birthday of children's author Beverly Cleary. Do you guys remember her? She's a living legend. She's part of the Library of Congress, and in 2000, they decided to name today National Deer Day, Drop Everything and Read Day. She wrote Henry Huggins, that was published in 1950. She wrote Ramona Quimby, age 8. All of those great books made me a really good reader, and there she is with President Bush getting her medal. So congrats to her, and if you haven't ever read her books, or your kids haven't, they're good ones and safe ones. You don't, it has a gold, what do you call that thing?
Stamp of
Seal of approval.
I remember those.
102.
Wow.
102.
Unbelievable.
All right, Kimberly.
Okay, well, just a few little treats from my friends, because welcome to Kimberly's Food Court. There we go. All right, so today, if you can't tell by what's on the table, is National Grilled Cheese Day, and I'm fully prepared to participate. This used to be my favorite thing to order when you get asked by a family when you're a little kid to come to dinner or for a lunch. The grilled cheese is the least expensive thing on the menu, so you should always order it and be courteous to the family.
That's good advice.
Yes, while sandwiches weren't invented until the 18th century, food historians say cooked bread and cheese has been enjoyed throughout history in all corners of the world.
Wow, so we invented the grilled cheese, then we went right to the light bulb.
Yeah, and it's like in Italy you have like the panini, and in France you have croque monsieur, all the whole...
Watch your mouth, young lady. This is a family hour.
I love it. I love it.
Thank you for these.
All right.
Happy grilled cheese day.
Well, you all graciously attended my huge launch of my book. Thank you very much. The Geraldo Show. I hope you buy it. It has a lot of great stuff in it. We had a terrific party. Everyone showed up. Who's that? That's Greg and Juan. And then there's Erica and Kimberly. Erica and Kimberly. And Brian was there. I couldn't find anyone to come to the party with.
You look like you were modeling.
And then Sean, who graciously hosted the party, Sean Hannity, one of my best friends.
He only stayed for 10 minutes.
And because he hated the fact that people from other networks that he didn't like. And Tiki Barber, the former New York Giant sportscaster. But there were so many wonderful people there. Eric and I really enjoyed hosting it. And Saturday, if you're in the Cleveland area, my new hometown, at the Woodmere Barnes & Noble in Cleveland, I will be signing the book, The Geraldo Show, at 2 o'clock Saturday afternoon.
I gotta go. Now what to call us? Special report with Chris Wallace.
Thank you, Greg. President Trump denies telegraphing military action against Syria. The president's pick for Secretary of State faces tough questioning on Capitol Hill, and the new national security advisor takes steps to consolidate power over how the country protects itself. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Chris Wallace in for Bret Baier. President Trump says a military strike against Syria to retaliate for that alleged chemical attack on civilians may come soon or not. The president is pushing back on criticism. He's doing exactly what he promised not to do, giving advance warning of U.S. military action. This comes as some in Congress try to get the president to seek permission to launch a strike. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon with a look at the president's military options. But we start off with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts and what he's hearing about what president will do and when. Good evening, John.
Good evening to you, Chris. In short, it appears nothing, at least not for the moment, following an afternoon of meetings here that the president had with his national security team. No decision has been made on how to respond in Syria, but President Trump will speak tonight with both UK Prime Minister Theresa May and the French President Emmanuel Macron about possible ways forward. In his public appearances today, President Trump was focused on tax cuts, jobs, and trade.
Our massive tax cuts that are growing paychecks all over our country. They're creating jobs and expanding the American dream, just like we said would happen. That's the way it's happened.
But behind the scenes, urgent meetings today with Defense Secretary James Mattis, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Joe Dunford, and other members of his national security team deciding how to respond to last weekend's suspected chemical weapons attack in Syria.
We're having a meeting today on Syria. We're having a number of meetings today. We'll see what happens. We're obviously looking at that very closely, and I will be leaving here. I was there, and now I'll be going back as soon as this meeting is over. But we're looking very, very seriously, very closely at that whole situation, and we'll see what happens, folks.
A senior administration official tells Fox News the White House is confident chemical weapons were used against civilians in Douma. French President Emmanuel Macron said he has, quote, proof that it was chemical weapons, though he did not elaborate on what the proof was. The British cabinet today defied public opinion polls showing just 22% of Britons support military action, agreeing to partner with the U.S. In a statement saying cabinet agreed it was vital that the use of chemical weapons did not go unchallenged. President Trump has blamed Russia for not reining in Bashar al-Assad, saying Vladimir Putin is at least partly responsible for the chemical attack.
It's too bad that the world puts us in a position like that. But, you know, as I said this morning, we've done a great job with ISIS. We have just absolutely decimated ISIS. But now we have to make some further decisions. So they'll be made fairly soon.
After first talking tough, vowing to shoot down any American missiles fired at Syria, Russia today was seeking de-escalation. A spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry urging dialogue with the U.S.
We're living in 2018. We have all sorts of communication, including Twitter, and we can resolve all the questions like that just picking up the phone, just sending messages. And I think that this is the case which should be resolved through the communication, but not through force.
The president has been using Twitter to send messages, warning Russia yesterday that missiles will be coming, nice and new and smart. That prompted criticism from some members of Congress that President Trump was telegraphing his military moves. President Trump fired back on Twitter today, never said when an attack on Syria would take place. Could be very soon or not so soon at all. On Capitol Hill today, warnings that the president may need to ask Congress to approve a military strike if he goes any farther than last year's strike on a Syrian airfield.
Anything beyond that, he will need a new authorization for the use of military force.
In prepared testimony for his confirmation hearing today, Secretary of State nominee Mike Pompeo said the failed state of Syria poses a mounting threat to human rights, national security, and regional stability, and it deserves an increasingly severe response. And he told the Foreign Relations Committee President Trump has the authority to strike without seeking the approval of Congress.
Yes, I believe the president has the domestic authority to do that. I don't think that has been disputed by Republicans or Democrats throughout an extended period of time.
With no decision by the White House tonight on what to do about military action, whether to use it at all, and a UN chemical weapons team headed to Syria to investigate the Duma attack, the window of opportunity for an imminent strike may be quickly closing. The President Trump likes to keep his opponents off balance and guessing, and the White House still insists that all options remain on the table. Chris?
John Roberts reporting from the White House. John, thank you. A military strike against Syria could come in many forms. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin has that part of the story tonight from the Pentagon. Jennifer.
Good evening, Chris. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons announced today it hopes to have their inspectors on the ground working in Syria this Saturday. That could interfere with the timing of a possible military strike if the U.S. decides to wait for them to arrive, presuming the Syrian regime allows them in.
Defense Secretary Jim Mattis went further than before as to whether a chemical weapons attack had occurred over the weekend in Syria.
I believe there was a chemical attack, and we're looking for the actual evidence. The OPCW, this is the Organization for the Chemical Weapons Convention. We're trying to get those inspectors in probably within the week.
The ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee told Mattis he has reservations if a U.S. military strike simply involves Tomahawk missiles like the 59 fired a year ago when Syrian President Bashar Assad last used chemical weapons.
Until we have a more long-term strategy, until we have some idea where we're going in Syria and the Middle East, it seems unwise to me to start launching missiles.
The USS Donald Cook is off the coast of Syria with about 75 Tomahawk missiles on board and more than a dozen surface-to-air missiles. The French have deployed a frigate to the eastern Mediterranean, armed with 16 cruise missiles and another 16 surface-to-air missiles to protect against any hostile warplanes or incoming missiles. The British Prime Minister has ordered British submarines to move into position as well to help. The USS Harry S. Truman departed Norfolk, Virginia yesterday, accompanied by 7 U.S. warships, and should be in the eastern Mediterranean within a week.
6,500 of the finest Americans you could ever sail with or serve with. We're trained, we're ready, any mission, anytime, anywhere, we're ready to go.
There is a risk that Allied cruise missiles could hit Russian or Iranian forces across Syria.
We are not going to engage in the civil war itself. We're trying to stop the murder of innocent people. But on a strategic level, it's how do we keep this from escalating out of control?
Fox News has also learned there are U.S. warships in the Red Sea in striking range of Syria as well. A Tomahawk missile strike alone may not be enough. A year ago, it had no impact on President Bashar Assad's thinking or his use of chemical weapons. Chris?
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thanks. Let's talk more now about prospects for military action against Syria. Texas Republican Congressman Mac Thornberry is chair of the House Armed Services Committee, and he joins us tonight from Capitol Hill. Mr. Chairman, I want to pick up on the comment from Defense Secretary Mattis that he wants to see international chemical weapons inspectors come into Syria this weekend. Does that indicate to you that there will be no U.S. strike until those inspectors are safely out of Syria?
Well, I think it's important that we not say when or how or where we may act. Clearly, if Assad allows these chemical inspectors in, we will be very cautious about anything that could endanger them. But at the same time, I don't think most people believe there's a high likelihood he's going to let actual inspectors in to prove what he has done, which is a terrible atrocity. We can't lose sight of that.
As we have mentioned, President Trump, at least in his tweets, has been sending mixed messages. Forget about the time, and I understand your sensitivity about that. Are you persuaded that he is eventually going to order a military strike to deter, or at least send a message to Bashar Assad? And are you convinced that's the right answer?
Well, I'm convinced he has not yet reached a decision on a military element. I believe they are looking at diplomatic, economic, as well as military options. You know, I do remember what happened a year ago, where there was a chemical attack that killed close to 100 people. There was a targeted strike against those Syrian military units that had used chemical weapons, and in the process, about 17% of the Syrian Air Force was destroyed. I think while it did not stop them from using chemical weapons, it slowed them down a little bit. And so part of what the international community needs to think about is how to send a message, not go so far as to escalate, but also not do nothing, which would, I think, send a message that this is okay.
Well, you say not escalate, but there are a number of your colleagues in Congress who are suggesting if we're going to take another military strike, that the U.S. should escalate. In other words, not the same kind of attack as last time, but something more that indicates that, in a sense, the Western community is upping the ante if Bashar al-Assad continues with this kind of behavior. Do you agree with that?
Well, I agree that he needs to pay a price. But I also believe the United States is not going to fix all of the problems in Syria, and we do not want to get involved in the Syrian civil war. What we want to do with our international partners is say that, is send a clear message, if with force if necessary, and I would support such an action, that this is beyond the realm of what humanity can tolerate, to kill innocent people with these horrible weapons that were outlawed nearly 100 years ago. And so I think we need to send a clear message, but obviously none of us want to get into some sort of escalation with Russia and others.
Well, I was going to pick up exactly on that point, which is that the Russians have been talking tough. And yesterday they said that if we did launch a military strike, they would not only try to shoot down our missiles, but might also respond to the ships, the U.S. ships, that have fired them. Do you worry that this could turn into a confrontation between the U.S. and Russia?
Well, I think it has to be carefully calibrated, and that's why I mentioned the specific goal of last year of military strikes against the Syrian units that use these chemical weapons to kill innocent people. Carefully targeted, not going after those other installations where Russians may be present, but being focused, but at the same time sending a clear message. And I think that's the kind of appropriate response, proportional response, that probably continues to make sense.
Finally, Chairman, last week the president said that he wants to get out of Syria soon, and in fact he reportedly had to be persuaded that he would keep U.S. forces on the ground in Syria for 6 months. Now he may be about to launch a military strike against Syria, which has raised the question for a lot of people. In fact, do we have a coherent strategy with how to deal with the situation in Syria?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind, number one, we're in Syria to fight ISIS, and we have had tremendous success in narrowing down the area that ISIS controls. We have not eradicated them, however, and what we want to make sure is that we have finished the job so that ISIS 3.0 cannot reappear. Remember the terrible mistake President Obama made when he completely got out of Iraq, and ISIS then came back, and we had to go in with much higher costs in all respects in order to get rid of them. We are not in Syria to fix all of the political mess, the civil war that President Trump inherited. But you have this chemical weapons issue, which again, as Secretary Mattis testified today, is really an issue for civilization that we can't just turn away from. So we need to keep our interests in mind. It's terrorism, but also acknowledge that we have these other targeted interests without trying to go in and fix everything that's broken there.
Chairman Mac Thornberry of the House Armed Services Committee. Chairman, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, sir.
The president's choice to be the next Secretary of State says Russian leader Vladimir Putin still has not gotten the message about election meddling. Current CIA Chief Mike Pompeo also says the country should work for peace, but be ready for the alternative. Pompeo sparred with senators during today's confirmation hearing. Correspondent Rich Edson has more from Capitol Hill.
Democrats say President Trump is assembling a war cabinet, and they say CIA Director Mike Pompeo, as Secretary of State, would be part of that. Pompeo, testifying at his confirmation hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, says as an Army veteran, he advocates war only as a last option.
There are few people like soldiers who appreciate diplomats and good diplomatic work. You train, you prepare. You want very much to be prepared if America calls upon you, but you are counting on the fact that there will be diplomats around the world resolving these challenges.
Democrats' first question for the Secretary of State designate, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into election interference and President Trump's attacks on it. Pompeo confirmed the Special Counsel's office interviewed him and then refused to say whether the president asked him to intervene on that investigation during a meeting at the White House last year.
What was the subject of the conversation?
Senator, I'm not going to speak to that. I'm going to not speak about any of the 3 investigations that I have been a participant in today.
He stressed the president never asked him to do anything improper and that if President Trump fired the special counsel, he likely would not resign in protest. If confirmed quickly, Pompeo would handle negotiations with Europeans on Iran policy. He says there's still a chance the U.S. could stay in the Iran nuclear deal if European governments agree to a stronger posture towards Iran. Democrats and some Republicans warn against withdrawing from the nuclear deal because Iran has already received the benefits. Pompeo argues ending the agreement can still halt benefits due Iran.
Senator, they're still receiving enormous economic benefits, even as we sit here this morning.
Pompeo says if the U.S. withdraws, he'll push for a tougher agreement. On Russia, he says he'll advocate the U.S. push back against Russian aggression.
I take a backseat to no one with my views of the threat that is presented to America from Russia.
As CIA Director, Pompeo has been deeply involved in preparations for the potential summit between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. Pompeo would not rule out a military action against North Korea, though he says there's a long diplomatic road before then.
Today, that's the #1 priority for this administration.
Aides close to the process acknowledge a final confirmation vote for Pompeo may not happen until next month. The chairman of this committee, Bob Corker, says he expects Pompeo to receive bipartisan support, and he'll likely need it. Republican Senator Rand Paul says he already opposes Pompeo, and Republicans only have a thin majority in the Senate. Chris.
More on this with the panel. Rich, thank you. Up next, is it prudence or hypocrisy? Congress works on a balanced budget amendment. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 2 in Detroit as angry protesters converge on the state capitol to denounce the governor's decision to close the last free bottled water sites in Flint, Michigan. The city has for years been dealing with a lead-tainted drinking water crisis that threatened the health of its residents. Republican Governor Rick Snyder says Flint's water system is now safe. Fox 5 in Atlanta as federal investigators say the Georgia Department of Transportation is partly responsible for the fire that brought down a section of Interstate 85 last year. The National Transportation Safety Board cites the department's decision to store construction materials under the overpass as a contributing factor. And this is a live look at San Diego from Fox 5. One of the big stories there tonight, thousands of sailors from the USS Carl Vinson return to Naval Air Station North Island from a 3-month deployment. The aircraft carrier conducted routine operations in the Indo-Pacific region, including stops in Guam, Malaysia, Hawaii, and Vietnam. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. President Trump is exploring the possibility of putting the U.S. back in Pacific trade talks. Last year, the president withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership as part of his America First agenda. The president has assigned his trade representative and chief economic advisor to look into the matter after a meeting with farm state governors and lawmakers. Another big day on Wall Street. The Dow gained 294. The S&P 500 finished ahead 22. NASDAQ jumped 71. Last night, we told you about congressional Republicans with buyer's remorse, that recent legislation on tax cuts and new spending could balloon the deficit. Well, tonight, a proposed remedy that will have some of you rolling your eyes. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel tells us about the latest push for a balanced budget amendment.
We cannot continue to spend money we do not have.
A passionate pitch for getting a handle on federal spending by arguing for a balanced budget amendment.
The joint resolution is not passed.
But the House vote came up short, 233 to 184 late today, shy of the 2/3 majority needed.
Unsustainable, mandatory, and undisciplined discretionary spending designed decades ago have created a debt monster that is seemingly unstoppable.
Democrats mocked the GOP for wanting to show fiscal restraint after passing tax cuts and approving more spending.
Like some stormy sermon from Trump on the virtues of chastity, I believe these House Republicans today really do deserve a gold medal for hypocrisy.
The House Democratic leader hammered the GOP, saying this push would go nowhere.
Now Republicans have the chutzpah to bring forth a balanced budget amendment engineered to force devastating cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
The White House is also pushing Congress on another fiscal matter, seeking to surgically remove at least a small portion of the $1.3 trillion spending package President Trump signed last month.
There's a lot of funding in the government that we would all agree is wasteful, and so I think there's several things that we will want Congress to take a second look at, and I think you'll see the President put forward a rescissions package in the near future.
Senior lawmakers in charge of spending see that as reneging on a deal, so it's not entirely clear how much support that will have. But it would give fiscal hawks another opportunity to show they're trying to do something about spending. Chris?
Mike Emanuel reporting from Capitol Hill. Mike, thank you. President Trump is offering rare praise for California's governor for contributing several hundred National Guard troops to his border protection effort. But Democrat Jerry Brown has attached some significant strings. National correspondent William LaJeunesse tells us what they are from Los Angeles.
Let's build some bridges, not walls.
After months of blasting President Trump's immigration policies, Governor Jerry Brown agreed Wednesday to send 400 California guards to the border, but went out of his way to say, let's be crystal clear. This will not be a mission to build a new wall, round up women and children, or detain people escaping violence. The California Guard will not be enforcing federal immigration laws. But that's already true. By law, the Guard is banned from making arrests or seizing drugs, a point Attorney General Jeff Sessions made Wednesday at a meeting of border sheriffs.
They can help. Certain things they are not able to do and will not be doing.
The Guard has already arrived on the Texas border.
I think it's more of a perception issue than they are providing any type of border security.
Taken literally, Brown's directive to only target criminal gangs, human traffickers, and drug smugglers is unrealistic.
A vehicle that's loaded up with either narcotics or just body traffic, we're not too certain.
When Guard helicopters support agents making apprehensions, they don't know who they're chasing. A Central American seeking, in Brown's words, a better life, or a drug smuggler.
Right there, black SUV.
Helping drive illegal immigration, violence in Central America and Mexico, which had its most violent year on record in 2017, according to a new report which blames corruption and lack of prosecution in the courts. Mexico criticized President Trump for deploying the National Guard, even though its military patrols the border with full law enforcement power. Now, President Trump did thank Governor Brown this morning, saying in a tweet, "Brown is doing the right thing. Thank you, Jerry. Good move for the safety of our country." Chris?
William, thank you. Up next, National Security Advisor John Bolton moving the pieces on the chessboard as he consolidates power in his new office. Now to some palace intrigue at the White House. Correspondent Jillian Turner tells us the president's new national security advisor is eliminating the competition to become the commander-in-chief's go-to guy on keeping the homeland safe.
I think he's going to be a fantastic representative of our team. He's highly respected by everybody in this room.
John Bolton's only a week into his new job, but he's already emerging as a first among equals, solidifying his power by ousting 4 key national security players in just 4 days. National security experts tell Fox News Bolton is now considering merging the National Security Council and Homeland Security Councils, the 2 most important offices inside the White House that make U.S. foreign policy. It's a move that's been tried in the past.
President Obama had inherited this system that had been set up under President Bush, a separate Homeland Security Council, which was established after the attacks in September of 2001. And so we took a hard look at whether it made sense to keep them as separate staffs or to merge the two staffs together.
Experts say the move gives Bolton more control and could make him the primary West Wing voice in the president's ear on foreign policy.
I have my views. I'm sure I'll have a chance to articulate them to the president.
Given Bolton's tough stance on China, Russia, Iran, combating terrorism and nuclear development, insiders predict even more aggressive policies. But one of President Trump's confidants says Bolton is just what the nation needs.
He is not going to always agree with this president, and that's a great thing, that we're going to have someone who is instinctively much more in the Reagan model of peace through strength.
Surprisingly, some senior Obama officials agree with Bolton's plan.
If I were the national security advisor for any president, I would want that kind of integration to ensure that everything is coming through me ultimately, and that I would be accountable to the president for all of those issues.
This move may sound like just another wonky development for Washington insiders to chew over, but it's actually got implications for U.S. policy abroad. With Bossert out, Bolton now manages his former portfolio. It includes counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and border security issues. Chris?
Jillian, thank you. President Trump is pushing back on a report he considered getting rid of special counsel Robert Mueller last year, tweeting he would have fired him if he wanted to. Also tonight, FBI search warrants for the raid on Trump attorney Michael Cohen mentioned the president's name several times, looking for communications between the president and his lawyer. Meanwhile, a former doorman at Trump World Tower in New York City says the National Enquirer paid him for a story he was telling about Mr. Trump, a Tower employee, and a love child. The Trump Organization says that story is false. A legislative committee in Missouri is considering possible impeachment proceedings against that state's Republican governor. The panel's report reveals graphic testimony from a woman who says Eric Greitens spanked, slapped, grabbed, and shoved her during a series of sexual encounters that at times left her crying and afraid. Greitens calls the affair an entirely consensual relationship. The governor's attorneys have focused on a comment by the accuser that she may have been dreaming about a picture she says Greitens took without her consent. An international chemical weapons watchdog confirms Britain's finding that a former Russian spy and his daughter were poisoned with a nerve agent of, quote, high purity. Britain blames Russia, saying only a nation with a sophisticated laboratory could have manufactured it. Russia continues to deny involvement. Sergei Skripal is said to be improving but remains hospitalized. His daughter Yulia has been released. This has been a somber day in Israel. The nation stops once a year to remember the millions of Jews killed in the Holocaust. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Amy Kellogg brings us the sight and sounds of today's memorial.
In Israel, haunting sirens ring out for 2 minutes on Holocaust Remembrance Day. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, while paying tribute to the victims of Nazi atrocities, pointed out that there is still evil and aggression in the world that needs to be confronted, such as the alleged slaughter of children by chemical weapons. In Poland, at the March of the Living, a symbolic walk from the Auschwitz to Birkenau death camps, survivors had the message, "Never forget," must be more than a slogan.
What would I like to tell the politicians? To act in order to prevent conflicts, wars, hatred, which has been growing in many countries during the recent years.
The Israeli president addressed Poland's new controversial legislation that criminalizes blaming any Holocaust atrocities on Poland. The Israeli president said that politicians should shape the future. Historians should examine the past, unimpeded. The United States has also been alarmed by the legislation, which critics worry will bury painful truths. The Polish leader admitted not all Poles behaved admirably and denies he wants a whitewash.
I, as the Polish president, want to defend this truth with all my power, including those elements that are difficult for Poles.
Polish Jews say the debate over the legislation has led to a marked increase in anti-Semitic attitudes and language. That law is now in the hands of the constitutional courts, which may decide to throw it out altogether ultimately, or at least water it down. Chris.
Amy, thank you. Up next, the panel on whether and when President Trump will pull the trigger on military action against Syria. First, beyond our borders tonight, Taliban fighters stormed a government compound in central Afghanistan today. They triggered a gun battle that killed 15, including 3 top local officials, before they drove Afghan forces out. It was the latest insurgent assault in Ghazni province, which is now largely under Taliban control. China has announced live firing military exercises in the Taiwan Strait amid tensions over increased American support for Taiwan's democratic government. Chinese officials denounced the recent passage of a U.S. law encouraging more high-level contacts with Taiwan. China claims Taiwan, which separated from the mainland in 1949, as its territory, and says the sides must eventually be united by force if necessary. And Estonia is offering residents free genetic profiling aimed at minimizing risks from typical diseases and encouraging a healthier lifestyle. 100,000 volunteers are donating DNA samples from blood, which will be analyzed for genetic variants linked to common illnesses such as heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
Bad that the world puts us in a position like that, but now we have to make some further decisions, so they'll be made fairly soon.
We are not going to engage in the civil war itself and in the worst interest of not just the Chemical Weapons Convention, but of civilization itself.
President Trump and Defense Secretary Mattis setting the stage for what looks like an imminent military strike in Syria. But exactly when and how big? Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes of the Weekly Standard, Susan Page from USA Today, and Charles Hurd of the Washington Times. The President, Secretary Mattis, and top national security officials all met at the White House today. We're told that Secretary Mattis presented the President with various options. Steve, what are you hearing from your sources about the timing and scope of whatever the U.S. response is going to be?
Well, nobody knows, right? I mean, in part because even if James Mattis laid out a particular battle plan or gave the President a series of options, and the President settles on one today, it's unclear that that will be the option that the President settles on tomorrow. If you think about where we were 8 days ago, the President of the United States had his national security team meeting with him at the White House saying, I want to end U.S. involvement in Syria in 48 hours. Everybody out, 48 hours. His team pushed back against that, gave the President other options, suggested that we would see chaos if that's what we tried to do, said that it was impossible, but we'd see chaos with a precipitous withdrawal. And just a matter of days later, the President is talking publicly about deepening U.S. involvement in Syria in a pretty serious way, and tweeting threats to Russia. The problem here is there is no serious strategy. There's no serious strategy. So to the questions you posed at the beginning, when, how big, I would add, to what end? What's the objective?
Well, along these lines of a kind of uncertain path, yesterday the President tweeted, and we reported on it last night, Russia, get ready. The missiles will, quote, will be coming. Today, he put out this tweet. Never said when an attack on Syria would take place. Could be very soon or not so soon at all. And that led to this exchange between the Democratic and Republican leaders in the House.
Of course, the President says, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I'll let you know in 24 hours, 48 hours.
I think you're wrong to suggest that he's dithering. He is being deliberate, and he is going through all of the options, and he's consulting our allies. That's what you want presidents to do in moments like this.
Susan, I think it's fair to say that the run-up has been bumpy, but isn't the President too far down this road now to call off a military strike whenever it happens?
Yes, I think that's right. I think he so clearly has said that we will respond militarily to the terrible pictures of the use of chemical weapons, that it would be a bigger walk back than President Obama when he decided not to go ahead and after Syria crossed his red line with action. And that was something, of course, Trump was very critical of at the time, has been critical since. So, yes, I think he will react. I think the question is, what does he do after the military strikes take place? Does this signal a longer-term commitment, unlike what he said last week? And also, does it get us engaged in a real military confrontation with Russia, which would have all kinds of perils?
And then there was Defense Secretary Mattis telling a congressional committee today that he intends to see international chemical weapons inspectors arrive in Syria, which is supposed to happen this weekend. And that raises the question of delay, Charlie, because you've got to know, I mean, this happened several days ago already, and the president talked about 24 hours, 48 hours. We're well past that deadline already, while delay, consideration, whatever you want to call it, deliberation is going on. You got to know the Russians and the Iranians and the Syrians are busy hiding any assets that they think they can hide.
Absolutely, and this raises all those questions about how deeply involved are we going to get? How involved are we going to get in terms of having boots on the ground, for example, if it actually comes to that? And Donald Trump is in a tough situation because obviously we've been down this path before. We know what Trump has sent missiles into Syria for this very infraction before, but it's not what he got elected for. And what he got elected for, he got elected on a lot of promises to disengage from things like this. And I think it's a real problem for him in terms of the people that support him. The other thing is that we've heard about we've heard talk about the helicopter that apparently dropped the poison, the gas that was tracked, and that's how we feel fairly certain that it was in fact the Assad regime. But we all remember the slam dunk thing. We all remember we don't have the greatest track record of getting involved in these places, and I think that when you couple all that together, it raises real questions about whether we should be doing anything over there.
You really have questions about, one, that Assad was responsible, and two, obviously,
I think we've had a pretty bad track record getting involved in things like this, and it is what and Donald Trump absolutely ran his campaign against this sort of involvement, and I think he has to be careful.
Steve, I got about a minute. Your response to that?
But he also ran his campaign on keeping America safe. And I think you're right. I mean, Donald Trump clearly ran against military adventurism and even humanitarian intervention, which was the justification he used the last time he sent we attacked in Syria. The bigger question is in part on the ISIS case that the administration is making. The administration is saying, and Trump said it just Monday at his briefing with military leaders, basically ISIS is wiped out. They don't have any territory, therefore they're not really a threat. That's been the consistent case from the administration. It is not true. That's not true. There are lots of ISIS fighters still in Syria, pockets of them, numbering potentially as many as 10 to 15,000 jihadists in country still. We have not wiped out ISIS, and I'm worried that the administration is making the same kind of mistakes, giving a false sense of security to the American people that the Obama administration made on both ISIS and al-Qaeda.
All right, we are going to have to take a break here. I have a feeling we'll be talking about this for a few days and potentially into the weekend and next week. Next up, the president's nominee for Secretary of State gets a grilling on Capitol Hill.
No one with my views of the threat that is presented to America from Russia. And if I am confirmed as the Secretary of State, I can assure you this administration will continue, as it has for the past 15 months, to take real actions to push back, to reset the deterrence relationship with respect to Russia.
Secretary of State nominee Mike Pompeo at his Senate confirmation hearing today taking a tough stand on standing up to Russian President Putin around the world. And we're back now with our panel. Steve, how do you think Pompeo did today, and did you get a sense from those hours of testimony as to exactly what kind of Secretary of State he would be?
I think he did well. The substantive answers that he was able to provide, even when I thought some of the questions, particularly from the Democrats, were gotcha questions. They were meant to embarrass him. They were meant to make him look bad. I thought he handled them easily. The substance, if you look at the content of his answers, they were strong. I think the pushback on Iran and North Korea questions that he provided, skeptical Democrats, was convincing, I thought. As to what kind of a Secretary of State he'll be, Mike Pompeo is not anybody's yes man. He developed a strong relationship with Donald Trump as CIA director. He found a way to talk to the president in a way that the president didn't see as condescending, didn't see as threatening. He was able to change the president's mind, or to at least shift his views on several specific intelligence matters, national security matters, the Afghanistan policy at the outset, and then also also the Iran policy, where Pompeo has, particularly of late, been arguing for fixing the deal rather than just tearing it up, which sort of cuts against type. He had a comment to that effect today in the hearings that surprised some people, but that's what he's been saying behind the scenes for quite some time. So I think he would be an incredibly effective advisor if he were in this role as Secretary of State. And I think the Democrats, if they're going to block him, they have to think about who Donald Trump would pick next.
Yeah,
who else would they want?
I was thinking about that as well, Susan. But there was some opposition in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which held the hearing and has to vote him out to the floor. Rand Paul indicates he's going to vote against him, and some Democrats, if not declaring, certainly indicated that. What's your sense of his prospects for confirmation?
Well, I think he may have trouble getting a positive recommendation out of the committee because Rand Paul has gone the other way, and two of the Democrats who had voted for him for CIA director indicated they were at least undecided, Tim Kaine and Jeanne Shaheen. Now, they can still take his nomination to the floor with a negative recommendation from the committee or with the lack of a positive recommendation, but no one's done that for Secretary of State since 1925. So it's possible, but unusual.
But what about Steve's point, which I think is a very good one? If Pompeo gets defeated, who's the next nominee for Secretary of State? And if you're a Democrat, would you worry about that?
And you know, he's done something that is un-Trumpian and has served him well, I think, and that is he called every prior Secretary of State, including Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright, to talk to them about their concerns. They expressed, Madeleine Albright told me this week that she expressed concerns about what's happened with personnel at the State Department, the reorganization plan that Rex Tillerson had pursued, and that Mike Pompeo seemed to listen to her. And, you know, that may serve him well in getting through this nomination process.
Let's go through at least a couple, by the time we have less specific issues that Pompeo would have to deal with as Secretary of State. Here he was today on the Iran nuclear deal.
The president is going to be given best advice, including by me. And if there's no chance that we can fix it, I will recommend to the president that we do our level best to work with our allies to achieve a better outcome and a better deal.
So does that indicate to you, Charlie, that Pompeo, as Steve suggested, is now against just ripping up the Iran nuclear deal?
Yes, I do think. I do think so, and I think that they're probably more inclined to try to figure out a way to reconfigure it instead of just absolutely ripping it out. But I do think that also, you know, you raise a very important point here. The situation with Iran, you have the situation with Syria, you have the situation with the fact that we could be getting into a proxy war with our greatest enemy on the planet, Russia. You have what's going on in China. You have all of this going on, and you have Democrats on the committee launching these long interrogations about the Mueller probe and Russiagate. You had Cory Booker.
No, there was even a question about would you quit if the president fired Robert Mueller. I think that was one of the early questions from the Democrats.
Cory Booker asking his views on gay sex during this confirmation hearing, when you have all of this going on. And in as much as average Americans are paying attention, they look ridiculous. It's very hard to take people like that very seriously. And I think that it's a real risk for them that they hurt themselves, because all of those are political issues that they're trying to gin up because we have the midterms coming up, and they're trying to take political advantage, and it's obvious, and I just think that Democrats have to be very careful, in addition to what Steve said about who comes next, but just looking silly and unserious when we have very, very serious
All right, issues. I've got 15 seconds left. We're going to go down the row.
Yes.
Does he get confirmed or not?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
I think ultimately he does, although I can't tell you which Democrats are going to vote for him.
Or don't you mean 50-50?
Yeah.
All right.
Could be.
That's it for the panel, but when we come back, a look at Mark Zuckerberg's worst nightmare.